So thank you, Bruno, for agreeing to speak with us, and you introduced yourself already.
My pleasure.
Thank you. It's good to have someone here from the European Development Finance Institutes Association or platform. And the first question, of course, would be, what is this organization and what does it do?
This is an organization of 15 European Development Finance Institutes from Finland up to Portugal. And we have a combined portfolio of 26 billion of long-term loans and equity in developing countries, and about 1/3 is in Africa, and about 1/3 is also in the financial sector to promote small and medium-sized enterprises.
Okay, very interesting. We've spoken, over this day, and I'm sure also tomorrow, a lot about blending and the EU's increasing interest in this financing modality for development. Now, as we know, there are various definitions of this modality, but I'd like to ask you in a general way, what do you perceive as the benefits, the potential benefits, and also the potential risks of blending?
The potential benefits, as we see it in the European Development Finance Institute, is that the European Commission could use the vast potential they have in terms of grant funding to promote much more private sector development in developing countries, simply by helping governments to create the enabling environment for the private sector, by helping to create the business environment, by helping to create a dialogue between the public sector and the private sector, which is very helpful in discussing all the necessary issues where there are bottlenecks as perceived by the private sector and where the private sector expect that the government is delivering in terms of reducing the cost of doing business.
Yes.
And by doing that, the European Commission could be extremely helpful, because a better enabling environment reduces the risk of the private sector to do business.
Okay. Well, we've spoken just now of risks, and we've spoken of projects. And here today at the European Development Days, there are various different parties. There's people traditionally from the development sector, there's the private sector, there are think tanks, there are academia, everyone is present, and everyone has a different definition of these terms. So now I would like to ask you, what do you think that the traditional development scene needs to understand about the functioning of the private sector in order to make blending a success?
I think what is not well understood is that the private sector has a lot of advantage, not only in terms of financing, but also simply in terms of management. They know how to run a water supply company. They know what is needed in order to provide sustainable water supply also to the very poor, because this is what is their business, and to make use of these vast experience of the private sector in order to provide long-term solutions, which helps us also to make growth more inclusive. This is a valuable source which is not well understood, because there's a lot of misunderstanding that the private sector, because the private sector is profit-oriented, and the private sector need profit, because in order to be sustainable over time, that because he's profit-oriented, he is not part of the development agenda. We say that the private sector is part of the development agenda. Why? 90% of the jobs are created in the private sector.
I'm wondering if you have an example of a project that you particularly like, or which is a particularly good example of how blending can be used for a better development impact.
My favorite example is what we have achieved within the German development assistance, in which we have used technical assistance in order to help the government in Senegal to restructure the energy sector in a way to allow the private sector to come in, so that the private sector now is allowed to generate power, is allowed to feed in the power into the grid, is allowed to distribute and to transmit power. And this has generated a tremendous demand by the private sector to invest.
Okay.
And even in rural areas and And since we know that 60% of the people in Africa do not have access to power, I think using the opportunities of the private sector could be extremely helpful.
Okay, good. Well, let's hope that all projects through blending facilities will turn out to be more in that fashion. Thank you very much for speaking with us. If you have any further thoughts for the Commission, for civil society, for participants of the EDDs in general, feel free to let us hear them as well.
No, I think that we should join forces because there are poor people waiting outside, that we provide better services for them, and so instead of always trying to criticize us, let's do jointly whatever is needed in order to promote sustainable development for the poor in developing countries. This we have to remind ourselves.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you very
Welcome.
much for speaking with us.
It was a pleasure. Many
again.
thanks.